When going about our daily lives, we don't know when a life-threatening event might suddenly happen, which is why knowing cardiopulmonary resuscitation or CPR as well as basic first aid is very handy when a situation calls for it. On the episode today, we'll discuss why CPR and other first aid practices should be a necessary skill for everyone to learn. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez and welcome to MEDTALK Health Talk, only on CNN Philippines. Knowing CPR can be the difference between life and death when the situation arises. Our guests are here today to explain more. With us is Dr. Camille Santa Cruz. She's an emergency medicine specialist from the Asian Hospital and Medical Center. We're also joined by Dr. Don Robespierre Reyes, who is a cardiologist from Alabang Medical Center and UST Hospital. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation or CPR is widely used in the medical world and in all practices around the world, and that's for good reason. But this practice shouldn't be limited to only there, not just for those with medical background or medical practitioners. Because in the event that someone collapses or becomes unconscious, time will be of the essence and you will need to act quickly in order to assess the situation. Now, in these instances, assessing the situation is of utmost importance. So I'll start with that notion, with CAMS. Dr. Camille, when a situation like that happens, how important is that time when someone is left unconscious or when someone needs help and when someone acts in order to help that person?
Time is of the essence. So knowing actually what to do and not panicking saves you a lot of time. So first off, you have to make sure that the scene is safe for you before you approach, no? Kasi what if the person that you see collapse, no? He might have suffered from a heart attack or he might have been, poisoned. You don't know. So first off, assess if the scene is safe before approaching. Next, of course, you have to check if he is responsive. So you have to call his name or you have to, touch him. Now ask, are you okay? If he does not respond, check if he is breathing. It's important at this point to call for help because it's a dire situation. No? It's an emergency, obviously, and you need a team with you. So kahit sino siguro na malapit, ask for help. No? They can contribute by calling the emergency numbers for you while you assess the person if he is breathing, if he has a pulse, ganyan. If you don't have any background about anything medical, you can actually position the patient sideways so that the airway remains open. So that will help.
Now, Dawn, I'd like to ask you first, when it comes to CPR, what are we trying to achieve? What is the actual act of CPR trying to achieve? What has happened to the person? Why they need CPR?
So when a person goes into cardiac arrest, what practically happens is the heart stops beating. When the heart stops beating, of course, the circulation to the different parts of the body, the brain in particular, stops too. So the act of doing your chest compressions and giving your airways, like giving the breaths, can actually make the heart pump again and provide oxygen that is much needed for the whole body to function again, the brain in particular.
It's very important that someone knows how to do it, but a lot of people might think that this CPR is something only for those in the medical field. Nurses, doctors are only the ones who should know this. Is that the case? Are only those with a medical background, are they only the one able to learn how to do CPR?
Actually, anyone can learn how to do CPR. We encourage, lay people, non-medical people, especially if you have family members na merong hypertension, merong heart disease, kailangan kahit pa paano may isa sa pamilya na marunong mag-CPR.
But Cams, you mentioned also, aside from knowing CPR, basic first aid is also a good plus to have in that knowledge bank that people have. Now, basic first aid, you can actually treat simple things such as scratches and bruises. So let's start with that first. When it comes to basic wounds, nagalos lang, konting gasgas sa balat, let's talk about how to properly clean a wound.
When you sustain a wound, any injury attack, even burns, the first thing to do is to wash it with running water. Pinaka-importante pa rin ng clean water, no, yung sa banyo o kaya sa kusina. Kasi yan yung mga common injuries that happen at home. Not necessarily may sugat ka agad, no. But, okay, if you have a wound, then make sure to wash it with soap and water. Like konting hapde, pero it's actually the mechanical pressure, no, that water provides. So open the tap in full so that certainly will clean the wound area to prevent infection.
Which is the proper way to treat a burn?
The goal is really to lower the temperature. So again, water. If there's no water available, I've read somewhere, no, na especially if you were scalded with a hot liquid, no, coffee or whatever, or oil, mas mahirap yung mainit na langis, no, sa balat kasi matagal siya matanggal even with water. So, you apply, if you're in the kitchen, no, flour pwede para ma-absorb niya yung mainit na mantika and then rinse it off. After dropping the temperature, apply a little moisture. Kasi pagka napaso tayo, no, compromise na yung skin integrity, and moisture will help in hasten the healing of skin.
Later on after the break, we'll talk about how to perform CPR, plus places where you can actually learn and be qualified to perform basic life support. All that and more when MedTalk Health Talk returns.
SMC, San Miguel Corporation. Bisag unsang industriya ang sudlan niini, tinguha sa SMC ang pag-uswag o paglambo sa mga Pilipino. Karon, gikan sa SMC, aniya na ang SMC Davao Cement. SMC Davao Cement, gama sa Davao para sa Mindanao. SMC Davao Cement, ato ni Bay.
Ito ang RPN, Radio Philippines Network, DXKT 1071 sa inyong mga radyo, ang Radyo Ronda sa Davao.
I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez and welcome back to MedTalk Health Talk. Now we're talking about CPR, or the cardiopulmonary resuscitation, which can greatly increase the chance of a person who is unconscious, where their circulation and their heart has stopped, to actually live. Dr. Don, let's talk about this now, the important parts. As an overhead view, let's explain to our viewers how the CPR process happens. So I'll give you a scenario, Don. Family dinner, there's an occasion, a reunion, one of the family relatives, after eating a heavy meal, all of a sudden just slumps over and falls to the ground. What should someone who knows how to do CPR do next?
Check if the person is breathing, and if he's a trained individual, he has trained in BLS, then he has to check for pulse. The best place to look for the pulse is not really the wrist. It would be here at the carotid area. So the first instinct that the rescuer should do is to provide your chest compressions. All right. So the two hands, okay, should be put together on the chest. So that's going to be on the middle of the chest between the breasts, and that's where the breastbone is. So put the hand together, clasp it this way, and then make your chest compressions. Now, the number of chest compressions, or how fast it is, it should be at the rate of 100 to 120 pumps a minute.
Let's talk about the chest compressions, because this is a vital key when it comes to CPR. It has to be over the heart. When it comes to how strong someone should be able to do those chest compressions, because there are some instances where even children are successfully and efficiently able to learn CPR, meaning the limitations, of course, of a child who is probably 9 years old, even 5 years old, is the physical strength. When it comes to the actual chest compression, someone who is not trained with CPR may be fearful of injuring the person who is unconscious. When it comes to the amount of force needed in order for the circulation to start moving again, Don, could you give us an idea of how strong these chest compressions are?
That rescuer, that bystander should compress hard enough or deep enough to a depth of about 2 inches. So the rescuer or the responder should not be afraid of breaking some bone, because let's begin with the fact that the patient's already dead and the patient can no longer be any more dead. So if ever you hear some crack, just continue on compressing, because if you don't do that, definitely the person will die.
Now, Don, when it comes to the consciousness of the person, earlier you said to check for pulse. Can CPR be done if someone is conscious?
So we don't really do your chest compressions on a person who has signs of life. That moaning or even saying some words, right, so that person's still alive, then you can say that the heart's still beating. But in any case that you're trained in detecting the pulse, if there is no pulse, but the patient is still gasping, like catching for some air, the usual that you see in the movies, like the patient's really running out of breath, and that can already be considered as cardiopulmonary arrest. So the very basic point here, you start compressions or your CPR on individuals whose pulse cannot be detected.
I'd like to talk to Cams here, going back to basic first aid for that matter. We talked about scratches, little burns, maybe at most second-degree burn. Now let's talk about bigger injuries, such as a cut from a knife or someone who's had their hand broken through glass. Glass, of course, has a deeper and cleaner cut, similar to that of a blade. When bleeding is involved here, Cams, what should be the thought process of someone who already knows basic first aid?
So first off, if someone sustains a cut and actively bleeding, apply pressure to stop the bleeding. If you are home, and you need at least a clean cloth, to help dress that wound. So aside from dressing the wound, you have to apply pressure. For some siguro who have experience joining Boy Scout or Girl Scout, yung nag-a-apply pa ng tourniquet, pwede yun. Although, not for long periods of time. Kasi if you tighten, like a rope, a string around an extremity that is bleeding, it will temporarily stop the bleeding. But at the same time, you might devitalize other structures there.
Now, I'd like to go back to Don. We were talking about CPR, and I was alluding on a device which is very critical. It's called the AED, or it's basically a defibrillator. Let's explain what a defibrillator is, because it gives a hefty amount of current, up to 3,000 volts of a shock to the person. Let's first start, anong relationship ng electricity sa tao?
So the heart is run by electricity. So without electricity, the heart won't be beating. But when a person dies, when a person goes into cardiac arrest, the electricity just goes down. But the heart goes into what we call electrical arrhythmia. So what is an arrhythmia? It's just like the heart going into convulsions or nagpo-fever siya. Okay, so alam mo yung nangingisay, and then the heart is rendered not effective in pumping blood kasi nangingisay lang siya. So the most common electrical short circuit, we can call that electrical short circuit, or what we call cardiac arrhythmia, is what we call the ventricular fibrillation. So the heart practically goes shivering or quivering like this one. And applying that, what we call that defibrillatory current, may nilalagay sa dibdib. Okay, so that's practically jolting the heart, and then hopefully with that jolting, the heart can regain a normal cardiac rhythm. So babalik yung normal na electrical current niya. Yung rhythm niya babalik.
These devices currently in all parts of the mall labeled AED. That is what it's for. But you have to definitely be trained and qualified to know how to use this device before you actually do this. That is what the training classes are for, which we will be discussing right after the break. How can you learn CPR, basic life support, as well as basic first aid? All that when MEDTALK Health Talk returns.
SMC, San Miguel Corporation. Bisag unsang industriya ang sudlan niini, tinguha sa SMC ang pag-uswag o paglambo sa mga Pilipino. Karon, gikan sa SMC, aniya na ang SMC Davao Cement. SMC Davao Cement. Gama sa Davao para sa Mindanao. SMC Davao Cement. Ato ni Bay.
Ito ang RBN, Radio Philippines Network, DXKT 1071 sa inyong mga radyo, ang Radyo Ronda sa Davao.
I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez and welcome back to MEDTALK Health Talk. We've been discussing the importance of CPR as well as various first aid practices that can alleviate the condition of a patient and change the situation from dire to some with hope. You don't have to be a healthcare professional or have background in medicine to know basic life support as well as basic first aid. Now, with the number of complications that exists, it's highly recommended that we equip ourselves with the knowledge of how to do CPR as well as the proper techniques for basic first aid so that we can help someone, a loved one or a stranger in an emergency and even maybe save their life. Now, Cams, talking about the knowledge of how to do this competently, effectively, what is the first step for someone who is watching this and is interested to learn more?
There are organizations that train lay people. We have some, like in Makati, Early Intervention Management. We have Academy of Emergency Sciences. All these institutions have Facebook pages. Just get on and, search for them. Sa local government, we have Philippine Red Cross, Philippine Heart Center. These are institutions that are, they train lay people to do CPR and how to use an automated external defibrillator. Most of the AEDs naman are dummy-proof. So you just have two buttons there, the power button and the shock button, and then the pads that you use have illustrations showing you where to actually put them on the chest. So, and dalawa lang instructions sa paggamit ng automated external defibrillator.
I'm trying to look over some of the main reasons why a lot of people are intimidated with the knowledge of basic life support as well as first aid. And one of them is that what you mentioned, the fear of doing the wrong thing in case of an emergency. Another one is the misconceptions about the cost of these. Now, we have to reiterate here that this form of knowledge is a form of investment here. But when it comes to cost, are we talking about, like a really high and expensive training session here?
If I may give a range, ang training would cost someone probably around 2,500, from 1,500 to 2,500 pesos. Although we understand everything jacked up because of the pandemic, because of use of PPEs, etc. Pero if you, of course, these organizations that train lay people also consider all these protocols and also consider yung costing nila. I'm sure it's not going to be that expensive.
Don, I'd like to ask, another misconception or hesitation that people might have is that they don't have enough time to learn basic life support or attend these classes. In terms of time frame, what is the time frame in order for someone to be actually trained and certified for basic life support?
Because of the pandemic, of course, the training has changed from pre-pandemic that we did it face-to-face, but now the PHA, on our end in particular, we have shifted to a hybrid type of training. So they get the lectures over the internet. So the lectures are accessed through internet, so it's on demand. So they're given about 1 week to access all the lectures, and then after going through all the video lectures on the net, then they go through a face-to-face, limited, of course, following your minimum health protocols to avoid, of course, COVID. And that's going to last for half a day lang.
Now, before we end the show, I'm sure a lot of viewers here are now interested in how they can save a life. Dr. Cams, do you have any advice for our viewers out here when it comes to basic life support and basic first aid?
So when it comes to first aid, basic first aid and basic life support, it's important, for each and every family, household to at least have one person trained. Kasi, like I said early on, it's not only investing for yourself, for your family, but also for your community. Know yung local numbers ng yung emergency hotline ng locality ninyo. like yung nearest na clinic, like I said, or nearest na hospital, para meron kayong tatawagan in case something happens at home.
Now, Don, how about you? Any advice for the viewers before we go?
You don't really need to be a healthcare worker in order for you to learn CPR. Kahit sino pwede, because you can save a life anytime, anywhere. The AED, we've discussed about the AED, the automated external defibrillator. You know, if we add that to our basic CPR, it can really increase the survival rates to about 30%. Now, in the country, we only have a few AEDs deployed in public places. Even in our own airports, we only have a few. Kung meron man, and we would like to urge to call on our government officials to please deploy more.
And with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Camille Santa Cruz and Dr. Don Robespierre Reyes for joining us in this episode, and very enlightening, and hopefully we inspired a lot of viewers out there to take that investment and learn basic life support as well as basic first aid. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and thank you for watching MEDTALK Health Talk. We'll see you again next time.
Ito ang RPA